We are continuing our study in the book of Genesis. We're in chapter 11. We managed to work our way through the vast majority of Genesis chapter 11. In the next part of Genesis chapter 11, it introduces the genealogy of Shem as it begins to introduce one of the main characters in Genesis, the book of Genesis, Abraham. So let's start from Genesis chapter 1 and we'll continue from where we left off. And the whole earth was of one language and of one speech. And it came to pass as they journeyed from the east that they found a plain in the land of Shinar, and they dwelt there. And they said one to another, go to, let us make brick, and burn them thoroughly. And they had brick for stone, and slime they had for mortar. And they said, go to, let us build us a city and a tower, whose top may reach unto heaven, and let us make us a name, lest we be scattered abroad the face of the whole earth. And the Lord came down to see the city and the tower, which the children of men builded. And the Lord said, behold, the people is one, and they have all one language. And this they begin to do, and now nothing will be restrained from them, which they have imagined to do. Go to, let us go down, and there confound their language, that they may not understand one another's speech. So the Lord scattered them abroad from thence upon the face of all the earth, and they left off to build the city. Therefore is the name of it called Babel, because the Lord did confound the language of all the earth, and from thence did the Lord scatter them abroad upon the face of all the earth. And so now we've coming to a transition part. When we look at the book of Genesis, the first major part, one of Genesis, is the creation and chapters in Genesis 1 and 2. And then that leads to Genesis chapter 3, the fall of man. And then the infamous chapter, Genesis chapter 4, we have our first murder, the story given the historical account of Cain and Abel, which leads into the depravity of man, leading into Genesis chapter 5 and 6, of the days of Noah, a time of repentance being offered up unto man and an opportunity for salvation. Of course, we know what happens with that. And then that leads into Genesis chapter 7 and 8, judgment upon the earth because of the wickedness of man, bringing about the flood of Noah. And Genesis chapter 9 and 10 begins to do what we're dealing with is the post-flood world. And Genesis 11, we're dealing with the Tower of Babel, right? And the introduction of Abraham. And so as we begin to complete Genesis chapter 11 and we move into Genesis the second part of Genesis, it begins to give us, as we'll see here, Genesis chapter 12 through 20 is going to deal with the call of Abraham, the separation of Lot, the battle of 9 kings, the Abrahamic covenant. And what we're going to see is that God takes a pagan Gentile through this process and makes him a Jew. We're going to study that in detail and learn things about Christ as well. We'll be revealed this process as well. Right. Then it will be the second part of Genesis begins to introduce Isaac in Genesis chapter 21 through 27, Jacob in Genesis 28 through 36, of course, Joseph, right? A type of Christ in Genesis 37 through 48, and then leads to Genesis chapter 49 and 50. So we begin the formation of and the introduction of the 12 tribes, which prophetically, of course, 24, we'll talk about that a little later. We're talking about Revelation, a concept from Revelation. All right, so before we get started here, the latter part of Genesis chapter 11, it introduces Shem's genealogy. And so on the left side of the screen here, you're seeing at the top left-hand corner, you're seeing Shem, and then we're going to go through his genealogy, which we've gone through that already in Genesis chapter 10, but we're going to redo it again with the introduction now of Abraham. But just looking at it here, but we're going to read it out. There's Shem, and there's Arphaxad, and then there's Salah, and then there's Eber, which we talked about in Genesis chapter 2. We talked about the significance of what happened in the days of Peleg, which corresponds to the Tower of Babel. We talked about that as well. And he's going to give birth to a son, Ru, and then Ru's going to give birth to a son, Serug, and Nahor then is born. And then from Nahor, right, he has a son, Terah. And Terah is going to be the father, as what we're going to see of Abraham. And Terah is going to have 3 sons. Now here, and in this chapter as well, it's going to list them as Abraham, Nahor, and Haran. But that's not necessarily their birth order or age. But here, Abraham is mentioned because that's going to be the significant individual that we're going to discuss. And from Abraham, we're going to see that Isaac is born unto him, and out of Isaac comes Jacob and the nation of Israel, and through the nation of Israel comes the Messiah. We're going to see that Terah has other sons. The father of Abraham, he has Nahor, and gives birth to a daughter. So here we're not talking about a son here, but the significance of Terah's son, or Abraham's brother. Nahor has a daughter named Sarah. And we understand the significance of this because Abraham is going to marry his sister, right? But they don't have the same mother, though. But that is going to end up, yeah, I think it says that is his, it says it's his sister. I think that's how it is described. I guess we'll get into details. I can't recall the exact details of it, but there's some strange relationship that we're all familiar with about the relationship between Abraham and Sarah as well. And then also we're going to talk about Haran, one of Abraham's brothers, son's Lot as well. So we're setting the stage for the most significant event in human history, the selection of one man, Abraham. Out of all of an entire world, God has selected Abraham, whereby God is going to enter into a covenant with Abraham and save mankind, all of mankind, by this one world, offer salvation to mankind by this one man as well. All right, so let's finish up with Genesis chapter 11, verse 10. It says, "These are the generations of Shem. Shem was 100 years old and begat Arphaxad 2 years after the flood. And Shem lived after he begat Arphaxad 500 years and begat sons and daughters. And Arphaxad lived 530 years and begat Salah. And Arphaxad lived and he begat Salah 403 years and begat sons and daughters. And Salah lived 30 years and begot Eber." And we talked about in Genesis chapter 10 the Eber, and we said Eber, he is the one that the nation of Israel comes out of. When we look at this genealogy here, we see Eber is here, and that's the beginning of the Hebrew nation. We kind of did a word study of Eber, and it's Hebrew. This is the English version of it, but the Hebrew version is Iberia here, or Eber. I don't know how they would pronounce that, but however they pronounce it, that is that pronunciation, the Hebrew here. And in English, we pronounce it Eber like this. But it gives rise to the word Hebrew. And so when we talk about, people say, man, I don't understand. They're called Jews, they're called Hebrews. Like, what is it? They're called Israelites, right? And so when you look throughout the genealogy of Shem, and we talk about the reason why, in other words, it's like, why do people call the Jews, when you speak against them, why you call them anti-Semites? And so that comes from the root of the word Shem. And so they are also considered Shemites, right? Or we drop the H off of that and we just call them Semites. So the nation of Israel, the Hebrew nation, their father that came off of the boat with Noah, right? The son of Noah, Shem, when he came off the boat, his name was Shem, and he brought forth this nation of Israel. So since their origins trace back to Shem, those that hate the nation of Israel, they hate they come from the lineage of Shem, and so they're called Semites. And so people that hate them are called anti-Semites. So you have all kinds of different names for the nation of Israel. Semites, and those that hate the Jews are called anti-Semites. And then you have this name, they're called Hebrews, and that comes from part of their genealogy as well, from this man named Eber, right? In the English is that, but we said in the Greek is this Iberi, which gives word to what we call Hebrews, or the Jews call themselves, or the Israelites call themselves Hebrews. Then you continue to look through the genealogy of the nation of Israel. Eventually you see unto Abraham was born Isaac, and then Isaac is born Jacob, and then Jacob gets renamed Israel, and then you get this other name of the Jews also called Israelites. And so all of the names that we speak of those that are part of the nation of Israel comes back through its genealogy. So understanding that help us understand why Jews are called Semites, right? And why they're called Hebrews from this Eber here, and why they are called Israelites. As we see, because they come from this genealogy, understand this genealogy of Jacob being renamed Israel as well. So it helps us give a good understanding of these things. Right. When we looked at this word that back in chapter 10, we also understand that the word Eber has a meaning, as well as the word as what when it's pronounced, it means Hebrew, but it also has a meaning. We looked up this Hebrew word meaning, and it means to pass over, or it also means a wanderer or a nomad or a traveler, right? So the Hebrew nation, they were considered a nation of people that were wanderers or nomads or travelers, and it traces back to their history, as we're going to see how they're going to travel, right, and eventually lead into the land of Canaan and what Abraham is going to do, right? And it talks about that they are this word, Eber, also means one who crosses over or from beyond, crosses over, or one that comes from beyond, right? And so we know there's a lot of this passing over that takes place associated both in the natural. We're going to see what this word Passover means. It's going to mean that they're passing over from the other side of the Euphrates rivers, entering into the land of Canaan. And so that's a passing over into a place where there is salvation or the presence of God, or a land that God has provided. Of course, we know that the word Passover also is talking about coming from another land, which is this earthly land, and passing over or crossing over into another type of promised land, which is the eternal life, the promised land that God gives to those that believe on Jesus Christ, right? A land that is uh, we have to be translated up into heavenly places, right? And so we are part of the Passover people as well, that we pass over or cross over into another land as well. And that land is, of course, for us above in heaven, which is going to come down in the new heaven and the new earth, right? And so that's what we are looking for and waiting for as well. When we talk about it means to cross over, we're going to see here that talks about the Hebrew nation were people that came from a region beyond the Euphrates River, right? So the journey talks about that and when we began the beginning of Genesis chapter 11, it says they began to travel eastward, right? Heading west. And this is the beginning of this process. And they're going to cross over the Euphrates rivers, and that crosses that borderline which separates the east from the west land as well. And we're looking at this person, Eber, here. He is the fourth in the genealogy from Noah to Abraham. So this is moving pretty fast here. Verse 15, it says, and Salah lived, and he begat Eber 403 years, and begat sons and daughters. And Eber lived 430 years and begat Peleg. And this is one of the things that we were looking at last time. We're seeing that from the generation of Noah, as these generations pass down, the longevity of man is being cut down. We saw that the longevity, and this longevity of man really decreases, we said when we were studying Genesis chapter 10, during the time when God confused the languages, and he and confused the speech, and he scattered the people abroad upon all the face of the earth, and he divided the earth. It was at that time during Peleg's years that we see this huge drop off from 400 years down to 200 years, and it continues to decrease because of what was going on in the land and the rebellion of man against God. But it says Eber here lived 430 years and begat Peleg. And Eber lived, after he begot Peleg, 430 years and begat sons and daughters. So he lived to be a very long time. And Peleg lived 30 years and begot Reu. And Peleg lived, and he begot Reu 209 years and begot sons and daughters. And Reu lived 230 years and begot Serug. So one of the things we see about Peleg is that his lifespan was just in the 200s, whereas his father was in the 400s and 600s and things like that. And so we see this rapid decrease in the longevity of man, and that's due to the increasing sin that is in the land, that is in the world. And so we talked about that one of the ways that God was not going to longer fight against man was one by decreasing his lifespan as well, to reduce the flesh's activities that man was engaged in the world. Verse 22, it says, and Serug lived 30 years and begot Nahor. And Serug lived, after he begot Nahor, 200 years and begot sons and daughters. And Nahor lived 29 years and begot Terah. Verse 25, and Nahor lived after he begot Terah 119 years and begat sons and daughters. So here we have in verse 24 and verse 25, we have the introduction of the father of Abraham. The father of Abraham is Terah, right? And so now we're getting down to this, the a big transition that is about to happen. Verse 26, and says, and Terah lived 70 years and begot Abraham, Nahor, and Haran. And so now we're seeing that Abraham's father, Terah, now is giving birth to Abraham, Nahor, and Haran. And Abraham is going to be the focal point of the rest of Genesis as we move into Genesis chapter 12 and the actions and activities that go on after that. Verse 27, so now these are the generations of Terah. So now we're focusing on Terah. Terah begot Abraham, Nahor, and Haran begat Lot. We're going to come across Lot again as we study the book of Genesis. He is one of Abraham's brother's son, or his nephew. Lot is Abraham's nephew. Verse 28 says, and Haran died before his father Terah in the land of his nativity in Ur of the Chaldees. So Abraham's brother Nahor had a son named Lot, but he ended up dying. Haran died before his father died. And so we know how then that Lot became the steward, or Abraham took on Lot to take care of him. Verse 29, and Abraham and Nahor took them wives, and the name of Abraham's wife was Sarah, and the name of Nahor's wife was Malchah, the daughter of Haran, the father of Malchah, and the father of Iscah. But Sarah was barren. She had no child. So here we have the introduction of Sarah, which is going to be very important because she's going to be married to Abraham. And then early on, they're introducing that Sarah was barren and had no child. And this was the wife of Abram. Keep saying Abraham, but at this point, he is just called Abram. And Terah took Abraham, verse 31, and Terah took Abraham, his son, and Lot, the son of Haran, his son's son, and Sarah, his daughter-in-law, his son Abram's wife, and they went forth with them from Ur of the Chaldees to go into the land of Canaan, and they came unto Haran and dwelt there. So here, this is very interesting. We see that there is the process we talked about last Bible study, is that from Adam and Eve, when they rebelled against God and they were kicked out of the garden, we said they were kicked out east of the garden. And then as Cain began to sin and he killed his brother Abel, then he was kicked out further east. And then the historical account tells us that man began to move further and further east, right? Further and further away from God. After the flood, and Noah and his three sons got off the ark, there was this process in which God was drawing men westward, back toward the promised land. And we see this introduction of Abraham's father, Terah. God was drawing him to the promised land. That's what it says here. And it says, and he took Abraham, he took Lot as well, and he took Abraham's wife, Sarah, and he gathered them all up, and he had the call that he was to go into the land of Canaan. Now, of course, we know that it was actually Abraham that actually ended up getting into the land of Canaan, right? That land of promise. But we see that his father also already had the draw, that God was already drawing him or trying to get him, or we can say that God was working to try to draw Abraham, trying to get him into that place. But his father did not take it all the way that he was called to go. He ended up, so he was in the land of Ur of the Chaldees, and he was pulled or drawn or had the unction to go into the land of Canaan, but they ended up coming in unto Haran, and then they dwelt there and they stayed there. I think the scripture goes on to say the reason why he stayed there, because when he got into Haran, he noticed that the lands were fertile and green, and it was just such a blessed area, what looked like to him. In the natural eyes, it looked like, wow, this is a place where, although he knew that he was called to go into the land of Canaan, he ended up, because he looked with the natural eyes and he saw, oh, well, this is a blessed place here. I can grow my sheep and my cattle, because we know that later on when Abraham leaves his father's home, in Haram, when he leaves, he's blessed with all these animals and things like that. So it was a place that, yes, that was a very bountiful place. Verse 32, and it says, in the days of Terah were 205 years, and Terah died in Haran. So he never completed that journey of what God was drawing him to, and God was drawing man back to the land of Canaan. Of course, in that area would be the tale of the two cities we've been talking about that's going on. There's the tale of the city of Babylon, and there's the tale of the city. The city of Babylon is the city of men, and the city of God is the city of Jerusalem. And so there's the tale of two cities that are going on, and God is preparing to establish a city that is going to be built for the glory of God and the purpose of God and the habitation of God, which is completely opposite to the city of Babylon, the city of men, which is the habitation of demons and devils. And so we see these two polarizing effects. And this is the last that we're going to talk about in the book of Genesis, and really for a lot of the Old Testament, that we talk a lot about Babylon until we get a little later into um, Daniel, and after the 12 tribes are established, and even further than that, the kings are established. We see Babylon has risen up, but it took them a long time to get there because of the confused lands of the confusion of the languages. But here we see where, looking at this diagram here, at the bottom of this map here, we're looking at, there are two rivers here. Where this red line here, this represents the river Euphrates, right? And the opposite river here that we see here, I don't know if you can see my cursor for those who are watching. This opposite river that we see here, this represents the river, the Tigris River, right? And so the goal of what God was going, now when they got off of the ark, they were over here in this upper top region here, which is Mount Ararat, and they managed to work their way down. And then God was trying to draw man to cross this Euphrates rivers, right? We said anything east of the Euphrates River is considered to be far away from God, or going away from God, or the people that oppose God, right? But God was trying to draw man to cross this river and to go into the land of Canaan. But it was very hard for God to get man to cross this river. They would always stop right here in the land of Shinar. In the land of Shinar, there was plenty, there was blessing, the land was fertile. Good for farming, good for water and irrigation and fishing and all those things. And so man would get trapped in this region here. But this was the region of a place that God had considered to be a land that was void of God. It was a land that where Babylon was built, where the habitation of demons and devils. We even know that this river Euphrates here is the dividing line between what God calls the kings of the east, that are anti-God, anti-Christ, and this Euphrates River here is known in the book of Revelation to have demons and devils that are bound up and chained in this river itself. And so, but God is trying to draw men from the east to the west to get into the land of the Canaan, the promised land, where God can then begin to bring forth his salvation and bring forth ultimately the Messiah to bring salvation to all men. But what happened is that Terah, the father of Abraham, God called him from out of Ur to go into the land of Canaan. But all he did was travel just along the river Euphrates, where there was plenty of bounty and blessing and probably all kinds of commerce and things like that. And he ended up not in the land of Canaan. He ended up all the way up into Haran. And in this region up here, this is the area of Syria, near the area of Turkey as well. And so he ended up being far away. And then what we're going to end up seeing as we move into it, I think we're done with Genesis chapter 11. What we're going to end up seeing is that God is going to eventually, he's going to call Abraham to do what um, he called his father Terah to do, which was to leave out of the land of the Chaldees and go and journey into the land of Canaan. But I guess looking at this, one would not think that the land of Canaan was a land that was filled with promises. You know, when you compare it to the land that he did not know anything about. Neither did, we're going to find out, neither did Abraham know what was in the land of Canaan, right? Terah, Abraham's father, didn't know what was in the land of Canaan as well. And but God called him there, but he wouldn't go. He did not go. He traveled all the way up the river and hung out in the land that God considered a region that was anti-God and anti-Christ, but then God called Abraham again and says, "Come out and go to a land that I will show you that you know nothing about, and you will be promised there." And this begins the journey of man being called to cross over, right? We talked about this crossing over from the land that was considered to be anti-God, anti-Christ, and to cross over and come into a promised land where you will have fellowship with God, and God will bless you, and God will be with you, which is contrary to what it means to be on the east of the Euphrates River. And so that's where we're going to begin our study. Now, Lord willing, not this weekend, but the following weekend. Not this weekend coming up. The following weekend, we will get into Genesis chapter 12, the covenant with Abraham.